Before this video starts, I want to clarify some legal-ish disclaimers. I will be going through a lot of this special, but I'm going through it for the purposes of education. It should follow within the guidelines of fair use within US law. I do not intend, nor should this video be a replacement for the original product, so keep that in mind before any sort of claims happen, because this should be well in the clear. So please don't give me any trouble. Alright, moving on to the actual video. Hello everyone. So, this is a topic that has been on my mind for quite a while now. Ever since the MLP G5 special came out on Netflix, which is the series start, I guess. Like it's a full 44-minute special to start off the 22-minute episodes that'll follow after later this year. I'm assuming the same kind of style and all that. And after watching it, there's been a lot of things about how that special looks that kind of bothers me, and there's a lot about it I want to talk about. I will warn you that this video is going to be very critical. Not a lot of it's going to be super positive, but I want to stress this because this is extremely important. What I am about to say throughout this entire video is not intended to throw any shade towards anyone that worked on Make Your Mark. A lot of these problems are not really any individual's fault. I'm sure the people at Atomic Cartoons, when they received all these movie assets from the G5 movie that Boulder Media made, and they started to create the special, trying to translate all these complicated assets over to their workflow for a TV series kind of workflow, which is very different. For context, when you make a TV series, even 8 22-minute episodes per year is 3 hours of content that you have to make per year, which is a lot. And for additional context, the G5 movie, that was an hour and a half, which is half that, took 3 to 4 years to make. Just to make that very stark contrast between the type of workload between the people at the movie that had hundreds of people working on it, literally hundreds, and then we have the series that has not a lot of people in comparison, and especially when you compare it to the cast of the special, which I actually want to check the credits right now just to see, I'm gonna count heads, see how many people worked on the first special. It looks like through the head count, there's around 200 or so people within Atomic Cartoons that worked on that special, which can seem like a lot, but keep in mind we don't know the timeline. We don't know when they started working on this. We don't know when they finished it. We know that they also have to finish it on time in order to get the other things they need to do for the series done, like the other episodes they need to do, and the other special they're doing. We also don't know if some of these crew members were only partially working on this project, part-time, or only, partially through the project's timeline. There's a lot of variables at play, and also it's probably a good assumption to make that a lot of people that might be working on a TV series for kids, maybe more junior compared to industry veterans that would work on a more bigger budget movie. The G5 movie was technically kind of a big budget movie. There were a lot of industry veteran animators that worked on the G5 movie, where I'm not sure if there are for this series. I'm not sure. I would have to look up the names. So I guess for context, there are about 40, just under 40 animators that worked on this special. The movie had around 50 or 60 people working on the movie for 3 to 4 years, something like that, maybe a little less, but somewhere around there. For the special, it might have been a year. Could be less too. Who knows? It's hard to know. There's a lot of information and variables we don't know that contributed to how this special ended up looking visually. So this is a complicated process. There's a lot of variables that needs to come together essentially to make a final product. So the main thing I'm getting at here is there's a lot of variables at play, and it's really not wise or smart or considerate to just blame certain individuals that you might find in the credits or whatever. No, that is not a good thing to do. I personally think it's okay to critique the final product as it is. If the animation doesn't look good, then just say it doesn't look good. That's fine to be blunt like that. I that's what I do anyway. But you don't want to just say the animators are bad or whatever, because that's probably not the full picture. There's a lot more going on when it comes to these kinds of productions. There's a lot of variables. I've said that a lot, and it's true. There's just a lot of variables at play. And I guess before I go too deep into this, I do want to also emphasize, if you don't mind how this special ended up looking, That's fine. Like, it's a lot of art is the eye of the beholder, right? If you still don't mind how it looks or you even like it, that's fine. But it is hard to deny how disproportionate the general public's response has been to the visual style of this series compared to how it was for like the G5 movie. For the G5 movie, there's a good portion of people that probably didn't like the art style for like the character designs, perhaps, but not really many people complained about like the visual fidelity, like the actual like quality of the renders and so on, the quality of the compositing work and all that. It wasn't really present in the movie besides like a few specific parts of the movie, but overall the movie was visually solid, like objectively speaking. While this special is very much not that. There may be some people that may not mind how it looks, but objectively speaking, there are a lot of quirks with how the special ended up looking, and I'm always going to be scratching the surface of it. Before we jump right in, I also want to cover two main like principles that I really need to make sure you guys understand, because I'm going to be talking about this a lot when it comes to like the render fidelity of the final image. Not necessarily related to the animation itself. I'm going to cover that when I'm going to actually go over the footage itself, but I want to actually like kind of go over some of the principles I'm going to talk about when it comes to rendering. So the first thing I want to cover is tone mapping, essentially. Tone mapping, color space management, whatever you want to call it. It is how you process the colors of your render. So what I have here in front of me is one of my renders for one of my recent like fan animations. It is rendered using Blender, specifically Blender Cycles, which is a ray tracing engine. And for if people don't know already, the G5 Special also uses ray tracing, just like the G5 movie, but like kind of differently. I'll describe that in a bit. I'm not covering that just yet. What I'm going to be covering is color space, tone mapping, etc., etc. And in this render that I made is right now not using the correct color space within Blender's like ecosystem of like how it processes colors, I guess. I'm not sure if that's the best way to word it, but that's essentially what it is. It's using the standard view transform. And when I configured this scene, configured the lighting for this scene, it wasn't using this view transform in mind. So one of the biggest like artifacts of that is we get a lot of overexposed areas within the image. Like you can see the direct sunlight, the areas of the body that are exposed to direct sunlight are completely whited out. They are just blown up in exposure. Another way to put it is saying that the colors are peaking in the higher end. And there are some other like side effects that happens within this like standard way of processing colors. If you look at like the transition from the very bright areas to the dark areas, we can see this like other band of color. Like there's white, there's this like super saturated like stock color of the actual color of the object that's being lit. It's just super saturated, fully blown out color, and then it goes to dark. It creates a very strange bandy effect in the final render image, and it's one of the key things you could look out for renders that don't use like a proper view transform within Blender, or like in a more professional setting, you'd use a tone mapper like ACES to properly transform the colors to be more accurately representative of how they would look to a real camera. So before you go into that, one thing some people might do in this situation is turn down the exposure, right? Because hey, like this is a completely blown out image. Why not turn down the exposure? Well, if we keep doing that, the entire image gets darker, and we still have blown out spots. Like this is still white here, yet the entire background is just super dark. Maybe you can play with the contrast a little bit to kind of help bring that back up, but that doesn't really help too much. But there's also some other things you could do to treat it to make it look a little better. But this isn't ideal. All those kinds of things you would do, like adjusting the contrast. Like if we adjust the gamma, you could probably like adjust the contrast to sort of fix up this image if you wanted to, but like it's not ideal because those are sort of band-aid fixes. And if we don't adjust the contrast at all, and if we wait until like the overexposed spots go away, then it's even worse. Like this is just the wrong way of processing color. One thing you can do when configuring the lights for your scene is keeping, like for example, keeping the brightness of the sky the same, but just like lowering the intensity of the sunlight brightness. Okay, so here we have our render. We have two renders. Our first render is the original render, and our second one is reducing the brightness of the sun, just the sun, not the sky, just the sun, to a third of its original brightness, which is extremely less bright. The character is not really overexposed too much anymore. There's still some bright spots here and there, but overall, not overexposed. But it's not quite right still, obviously, because the sun is just way less bright now, which isn't really realistic. So this is a common solution people might come up with when they work within a stock computer color space, which is typically called like sRGB or whatever. So like one of the side effects is when we try to make the sun as bright as it realistically should be, it overexposes the image. And if we try to reduce the exposure, too much of the image is underexposed, while it's still getting overexposed in some areas, because the dynamic range is so crushed in both ends, on the high end and the low end. And the only way to really get around that without using a different color space is to just reduce the brightness of your lights, which is not ideal, because it creates images that feel a lot more dull and less vibrant than they should be in a way, but also more saturated because of how the color space doesn't properly desaturate the colors when they get bright and all that. Like, there's a lot of variables at play causing weird color problems when you use this kind of stock color space, which I also suspect that G5 Special is using. They are using a stock color space instead of a color space that is typically referred to in like as the industry standard ACES, or within Blender, Filmic. So if I turn on Filmic, if I go to the original image here, and I turn on Filmic, you can see that the overexposed areas, without even tweaking the exposure here, is no longer overexposed. And I can even show it to you in this graph here. We can see this line up here. That's the 1.0 line. That's like, if any of these parts of the waveform are above this line, that means your image is overexposed in that area. And we also have the 0 line, which is basically no light at all. And if we go back to the stock standard view transform in Blender, we can see that all that data is just way above that line, meaning that it's extremely overexposed in that same exposure level, using the realistically bright sunlight. If you go back and forth, you can see that the parts of the image that are affected by the sunlight gets reduced down to around that level where that 1.0 line was. The only parts of the image that wasn't moving there was like parts of the sky, because that wasn't something that changed. And if we were to adjust the exposure, it basically do the same exact thing, but like to the entire image. So both the sky and anything affected by the direct sunlight, you can see the entire thing gets scaled down, not up, but like down to that 0 line, where there's essentially no light. And if we go back to Filmic, we can see that all of the data in this waveform here is below the 1.0 line in the same exposure setting, because of how it treats the colors. Instead of the brightness of the image just shooting way above the 1.0 line, it smooths it out. Even when I crank up the exposure, right? When I crank up the exposure to way above anything reasonable, it basically scales everything into the 1.0 line smoothly and not letting it shoot way above it. That's one of the things it does. And another thing this color space does is it properly desaturates colors the brighter they get in a way that's more smooth. And like if we go back to the standard color space, technically now that this is getting whited out, white is technically a fully desaturated color. It is no longer a color, it's just white. So it's getting desaturated, but it's not really at the bright spots that are not overexposed. You can see the banding problem here I was talking about earlier, where it's fully saturated color at full brightness, creating this band around the bright spot and the less overexposed spots of the character. But in Filmic, it doesn't do that. It properly treats the colors to where it doesn't do that, essentially. There's a really good video that covers this kind of idea of using ACES or Filmic in your renders and how you can use it to your advantage. I'll link in the description. It's really good if you want to like get familiar with the concept of it. But yeah, that's what this is. And it's hard to really know why Atomic Cartoons probably isn't using this. I guess I can't technically say for sure, but there's so many visual signs that I'm going to be going into once I dive into the footage that are tells of them not using this kind of color space. They're like using the stock computer sRGB color space that is not correct. It's literally the incorrect way to be processing color. They shouldn't be using that. And it's hard to know why, because doing this is really free. It doesn't cost any sort of performance. It's just treating the colors of a final render. It is not that computationally expensive. So maybe they're not using this because the artists, like the lighting artists or whatever they're causing a rendering supervisor or whatever, aren't familiar with working in this color space, and they're not really willing to take the risk of changing their ways into using this color space that will change how they want to light their scenes. Because if you use this color space, you want to start changing how the lights are set up in your scene, because if you have lights that are set up in your scene that are configured with the old color space, the old computer-based, like, stock way of processing colors, a lot of the time, the lights might feel like they're too dim, because they probably are. You might want to crank those up. Among a few other things you want to do. It's a really complicated topic. It's a game changer. It changes how you want to work with lights in your final image. So maybe that's why they're not using it. They're not familiar enough, so they don't want to waste time learning it if they can just go to a system they've been using for years before this new color space was essentially starting to become industry standard. I'm ranting, but like, it is, in theory, a really free thing to use, but they're still not using it, and it's hard to really speculate why. We can speculate all we want, but we won't really know for sure. So, kind of just have to leave it at that. So the second thing I want to talk about is ray tracing, and like specifically the type of like shortcuts you would do to speed up render times within a ray traced environment. Because the G5 Special, Make Your Mark, is a ray traced environment. It still is, undeniably so. But they're definitely taking shortcuts. So let me explain. There's probably multiple shortcuts they're doing, but one of the biggest things that they're doing that is saving them the most render time, I'm pretty sure, but also causing the biggest visual downgrade as well, and that's clamping the amount of light bounces that occurs when you shoot light rays, right? So in a ray traced environment, technically, like, when you render an image, it's path traced, but like I want to try to keep this simple. In a ray traced environment, you can think of a light source casting a bunch of light rays from its source, right? And those light rays bounce on a bunch of objects until it eventually reaches your eye, right? Sometimes that light bounce can only happen one time and it'll reach your eye just fine. But sometimes it'll hit a bunch of objects in the room that you happen to be in and then finally reaching your eye. Like, that's just like the general basics of how light bouncing would work. Instead of it being your eye, it would be the digital, like, imaginary camera within your 3D scene that you're using to render the final image. And technically it's being done in the reverse direction for like ray traced renders, where it's casting rays from the camera until it reaches a light source, because that's a more efficient way to do it, but it's the same kind of idea. So when you reduce the amount of light bounces that happens, what can happen is the final render will end up looking darker than it should be in areas where you wouldn't really expect it to, because you're cutting off the light bounces short. It's not completing its journey, so it's just, you're leaving a lot of areas within the render that really should be receiving a decent amount of light, but they aren't. So for example, in this render we have here, it's using the stock light bounces setting within Blender, where it'll light bounce as many times as it sees fit until it is determined that that light bounce will no longer meaningfully affect the final render. That's one way to think about it. So it's essentially faux fidelity of the render. But if we go into the second render that I did, with light bounces set to just one, only one light bounce is allowed until they just get terminated, is this one. So if we toggle back and forth, you can see that it's a lot darker in a lot of areas where you wouldn't expect it to. And that's just the symptom of cutting the light bounces short. It can start screwing with the colors, oftentimes just making them darker. But if you have a more complicated shader within the scene, where oftentimes characters will have subsurface scattering, which essentially, let me take out my phone. Subsurface scattering is essentially how light passes through flesh, essentially, your skin and stuff. It doesn't just have to be skin, it could be other like plastics and whatever, but like for characters it's typically just flesh. Light bounces within your own skin, and if we cut off the light bounces within the subsurface scattering, it could incomplete the subsurface scattering shader, causing discoloration of the body, essentially. So for my model, for my specific situation, around the lips of my character, there's less and less hairs, which means that cutting off light bounces prematurely isn't going to affect that area as much because that area of the model is not as complicated. So already by default, the area where there's fur is just going to be straight up darker than around the lips. And another thing that can happen that can sort of distance the mismatch between these colors even more is the fact that the subsurface scattering gets cut off, screwing with the colors even more of the base model underneath this fur. And when we zoom in here, we can see that not only is the hair color just getting darker straight up, the color of the lips is just changing. It's apparently getting more saturated for some reason. I don't even really know why, but it's just an artifact of just cutting off the colors. Because essentially what we're looking at here, not here, but this one, is just an incomplete render. It didn't complete. We cut off light bounces short. So yeah, there are things you can do. Like you can start changing the colors of the hair, and of the base model underneath the hair to sort of try to match them up again, but that's not gonna be consistent with every sort of like lighting scenario, because these are just artifacts of cutting off the light bounces. It's going to change the result if you like start changing lighting to be more of an indoor scene versus an outdoor scene with a really, really, really bright sun. Settings you might tune for an outdoor scene, if you try to match the colors of the base color underneath and the fur, might not work in an indoor scene. So like, that's not really a solution, it's just a band-aid fix to a problem that doesn't go away. It's sort of the same situation with the Colorspace situation. We're not really fixing the problem if we do it like that. It's just a workaround that's not really gonna solve the problem because we're still gonna run into the same problem in other scenarios. So yeah, we'll be seeing a decent amount of that in the footage we're going to be going over as well. So yeah, now I do suspect that the special is doing this. I really do, but it's hard to tell because we don't know what render settings they were using. I can only go based off of my own knowledge of how rendering works and what the final render result was for them when they published the Make Your Mark special. So I'm going to be going over examples of where I think this is impacting the image the most within Make Your Mark. But yeah, with that very long preamble over with, let's dive into Make Your Mark and figure out what's going on. All right, so the first opening shot, we have just the birds, and we can already sort of see the problem with Colorspace, where the whole front of this bird is not super bright, but then we get to the edge of the bird, and it's just completely overexposed rim lighting. So again, that's sort of evidence of the lack of Colorspace management, no toe mapping, or whatever we want to call it. There doesn't seem like it's present that would treat the colors in a way that would be more accurate to how cameras would capture color in real life. And then after this, we have Zip flying by, which is a little rough looking already at the start. The composition's a little awkwardly set up, but most importantly, I think, is the motion blur looking really, really strange, and it's specifically because I know for sure, because this is exactly what will happen if you do it this way, is it's vector-based motion blur done in post-processing. It is not real motion blur that is sampled within the actual ray tracing environment itself. It is just post-processing motion blur onto the character. I don't want to get too far into this tangent, but it is pretty prominent within the special, so maybe I'll wait until later to dive deeper into it. Alright, moving on. The wing shot isn't too bad, other than, of course, again, Colorspace, overexposure, like, just straight up overexposed. So, for as far as I can tell, throughout the entire Make Your Mark special, is that these models are pretty much just the same assets they used within the movie. So a lot of the fidelity of the models do carry over from that, but to a limited extent. I'll explain why later once we get to that. But ultimately, this does mean that shots like this can still look pretty good because they are using the movie assets straight up. The feathers are still fully detailed. The hair is pretty much fully intact for like the fur coats. The shading on it is a little different, but like overall, like it's still there. The hair for the manes and tails are still pretty much fully there in full force, just shaded a little bit differently, but overall it still holds up pretty well. Oh my god. I just noticed this. I was about to comment on something else. I'll get to that in a second. But like, look at this. Look at Zip's right front hoof here. Look at her fur. her fur gets completely disembodied. No, that's not the right word. It's just not part of her. Like all of a sudden, her bare hoof's exposed because her hair is like following a completely different animation. So it makes me wonder, like maybe the hair simulation was baked for the fur, like at a different stage in animation, and then the animation was revised at some point, but they forgot to re-simulate the hair, so the simulation of the hair just didn't follow the final result. Um, yeah, that is rough. That is especially this was like the very start, and it's already extremely visually incorrect, to say the least. But the other thing I was mainly going to comment on was the brightness of the sun here. Obviously, it should be a lot brighter than this, but it's not. So it ends up making the image look way too dull because if you don't have a proper color space, when you try to bring the exposure up, it's going to blow out the image way too quickly. They had to either bring the exposure down or just lower the brightness of the sun, which just isn't the right way to do it. It just doesn't create a realistic looking image because that's not how light would work. Light from the sun would be way brighter and more vibrant than this, but you know, whatever. I won't be commenting too much on that kind of stuff throughout this, but just pay attention to that. The brightness of the sun always feeling quite off in outdoor scenes. In indoor scenes is not too bad, but outdoor scenes it's particularly noticeable. Anyway, going back to this scene, the animation here is interesting. So the main thing that catches my eye is like the transition from this pose, like being perched above this window upside down, which is, you know, fine, whatever. It's from a distance. I'm not going to comment on this too much. But when we zoom in, Zip unperches, flies, quickly rotates her hips around, and then stops in place. But stuff like this is going to be hard to comment on too much because this kind of animation would be very complicated to do. It would be a very acrobatic kind of animation. Because what I would do in thinking about it, if I were to actually tackle this myself and I had all the time in the world to do it, is like these kind of maneuvers you can make look convincing, but it's not, mainly because of the wings. The wings are a very powerful tool for a character that can fly. They would allow you to control how your body is positioned. That's what I'd be thinking about. If I want a character to be doing these quick movements, adjusting their position and all that, I would want the wings to sort of support that effort in animation. So like, for example, when there's a twist here, when Zip twists to, I guess, like clockwise her direction, I would expect her left wing to do a large flap to sort of push her body that direction, to her kind of clockwise direction, but there's no like big flap there. She just sort of flips on her own. And when she does this maneuver where she flips again, she rotates her body, and she's more upright as well. And her wings are not showing any of that effort. Nothing. There's nothing from the wings. The wings are just stuck in the up position, and that's it. I would expect the wings to be flapping pretty hard for that, and also be sort of directional. So like, the wings would be flapping sideways because she's moving her body like horizontally, strictly. And she's also not like moving in line with her body, right? She's rotating, so her wings would be flapping directly to our right, stage right, but it's not. And for that right side wing flap, I would expect one of the wings to be flapping harder than the other because she's still twisting clockwise. So that kind of effort would need asymmetrical like forces involved. So one wing would help support like the right to left movement overall, but would not be as intense as the I believe would be the right wing to sort of twist her body clockwise. Another thing to note is like the path of where like the head follows, especially, is extremely jarring. So we have the first frame, and then it suddenly juts to the right side of our screen. Then no motion at all, really, it just moves down slightly. Then suddenly to the left, more left. There's just, okay, fine, so far, fine. It's the head starting to rise again. Then the head's going down again. So like, head's here, slightly up again, and now it's sort of level. Then it's up again. Then it's suddenly going more to the left, suddenly. Then it's going slightly to the right again and up. More right. Then left again. Left down. Left down. Left down. And then it sort of smooths out. The pathing of the head is extremely jittery. When creating an animation in 3D, if you don't pay mind to the pathing of any sort of body part of a character, it's going to feel like they're weightless because of how jarring their motion is going to be. And this is an example of that, where their head is just constantly moving wherever because I'm assuming the animator either probably didn't have time, probably I would bet, but mainly the animator is posing for the body first, and when you pose the body, it moves everything else with it. I imagine if you're using a FK forward kinetic setup, and then once you move the body, ideally, if you have the time for it, afterwards, you would start polishing up the other parts of the body to sort of stay, not stay, but like follow a consistent path in space that doesn't feel like it's just not following any sort of physics rules. And this kind of animation is pretty much everywhere within the special as well, where the pathing of any sort of body part is just sort of not following anything really. It's just sort of doing things. I don't know how else to put it because it's just not a realistic way of how anything would move in a 3D space in real life even. It might look like I'm nitpicking, and I would be if this was like the only part of this entire special where this is a problem. But this problem is everywhere in this special. No matter where you look, every single scene is going to have things like this that's happening because the animation is essentially not fully fleshed out. I don't want to blame any particular animator that would have animated any of these particular shots or anything. A lot of this is symptomatic of just not having the time to complete the work. Whether that's the case or not, it's hard to say. I'm not part of the team right now, obviously. So, like, I don't know. Now, for this scene, obviously, we have a close-up shot of Zip. We can still see the individual strands of her fur, which is good. Again, it's carrying over from the movie. I'm pretty sure all this is carried over from the movie, except I'm pretty sure the shading of the fur is a bit simplified, but it's a little... I don't want to get too deep into that topic. There's already so much I need to talk about here. But the fur itself doesn't look too bad, so, like, I have no commentary. The main issue with this shot is if you look at it in motion, specifically the wing in the back. Look at the wing doesn't feel like it's should be moving there, but it is clearly. And maybe some people have sort of felt like this is like a stop motion kind of animation where it feels like it's not really moving because it's stop motion. It's when you do an actual stop motion movie, you're just taking still pictures, right? The reason is, I imagine, it's because there's no motion blur here. There's a lot of scenes, a lot of shots where they just don't do the composited motion blur. They just don't do it for some shots, for whatever reason, which is a problem because any camera that has any sort of exposure time is going to have some motion blur, even if it's a little. So the fact that there's no motion blur here at all makes this feel very, very strange, and a lot of the special has a lot of moments where there should be motion blur, but there isn't, and it looks pretty strange because of it. Not just because of the animation quality or fidelity. The animation could still look decent, but not look right because of the motion blur not being. It's just another piece of the puzzle that is sometimes just missing in some shots. And it happens again when we do the zoom out. When the camera zooms out pretty quickly, you would expect there to be a lot of blur along the face when it zooms out, because that's part of the image that's moving the most in this zoom out shot. But there's nothing, absolutely nothing. And then continuing with this shot even further, if we look at Zip's animation here, let me go to the start point. Zip's animation there for that shot was fairly weightless because only her head was moving. Other than her, like, her chest starting to push up a little bit when she's starting to get up. I think it's her chest, or it might even be her neck, but whatever it is, once the camera is done zooming out here, it's only Zip's head and maybe slightly a bit of her neck that's moving here without any sort of weight shifting or other subtlety in movement down the chain, essentially. We have the top of the chain being the head, and then the base of the body being the lower part of the chain. There's nothing going on in the body movement. It's just the head. And that's not realistic. You don't want that. But obviously, if they don't have time to do it, then I guess that's one of the things they would forgo on doing. They would just not do it because it would take too much extra time when they have so much more work to do past this point. One of the things that I should have mentioned earlier um, was how a lot of these factors with time, staffing, um, and budget, like money, is like not really setting up anyone at Atomic Cartoons for success, really, in terms of proper rendering and animation. I imagine there's so much working against them here. Oh, and also the fact that this is a new project for them. This is a pretty ambitious project that's new for Atomic Cartoons. They get these extremely high quality assets from Boulder Media that made the movie, and now they have to adapt it to a TV series. I can't imagine how complicated that is to also work into your workflow. That might also be contributing to why the start of Make Your Mark is quite rough. Maybe it'll get better with time, even if nothing else changes. Maybe. It's hard to say. It's all speculatory at this point. But, like, I can only imagine. Like, it has to be rough over there right now. And the thing is, the main reason this is still okay to push out in Hasbro's mind, I imagine, is because My Little Pony is still a kid's franchise to their eyes, right? It's something they make specifically for kids. And I mean, technically, that is their primary demographic. They're not wrong. Kids aren't going to notice all this like specific detail stuff. Most kids aren't going to really care that much, I guess. But I don't think lowering the budget so much to a point where it's only acceptable for kids visually, in terms of like all these visual artifacts just distracting so many people, except for kids pretty much, and like other like people that don't typically care too much about that. I worry because this is so distractingly inconsistent that it's going to lose a lot of people over time, and this series may not have like the long-standing presence that FIM had, Friendship is Magic. The thing is, with 2D animation is a lot easier to cheap out on while still keeping the animation and characters and art style appealing. While it's not really the case with 3D unless you design the characters from the ground up to work within a cheaper style, which this clearly wasn't, because these models were ripped from a big budget G5 movie, while this is not a big budget series. So yeah, I worry a lot because of the visual fidelity, and I want it to improve a lot, and hopefully it does with time, but it is so rough at the start, because I haven't even gotten into like the first bit of dialogue from Zip, really. It's still the very beginning, and I've found so many things to pick out that is just like, this looks weird. This looks wrong and incorrect. It shouldn't look like this. It's just everywhere within this special. And obviously, I'm not going to be going over through every single bit of the special. I'm going to be skipping through to more like prominent parts where I really want to talk about some stuff. But yeah, anyway, to wrap this rant up, I just think it's really important to try to keep visual fidelity a little bit higher than this, at least. I know for a fact that no matter what, this will never look as good as a G5 movie, and that's fine. I don't want it to be that, because I know how outrageously expensive that can get. Because I think there are things that they can fix that'll be fairly easy. Animation fidelity might be a bit harder because that will require more experience from staff, maybe more staffing in general, more time, more budget, etc. But there are some free things. Colorspace Tonemapping, that could be one. Maybe investing in more hardware to render things faster so that you don't have to cheap out on like Raytracing shortcuts. Maybe that's another thing they could go with. That's just a piece of the puzzle they could start putting back in to increase the fidelity. Motion blur, maybe. Make sure motion blur is on every shot, even if it's just vector motion blur. It's still better than nothing, you know. So anyway, let's move on. All right, skipping ahead a little bit, we have this shot here. It's kind of infamous at this point, especially because of Izzy. That's right there. People took notice of Izzy's face there and kind of like interpreted that as like Izzy being really tired or something. When I think that's mostly just artifacts of just all the rendering shortcuts they're doing. Mainly the ray tracing one where it cuts off light bounces, where it causes weird color problems with the characters. And also, to point out the tone mapping thing again, we can sort of see evidence of the lack of tone mapping here quite prominently, specifically on Hitch. Hitch is a pretty good one to look at here. Where Hitch is like top of his muzzle and the top of his cheeks are extremely bright, almost overexposed, and then on the outside of the overexposed, nearly overexposed area, we have this like band of saturated color before it gets darker. That only really happens in like computer calculated things, basically. Without any sort of color treatment afterwards, that's typically what happens in this kind of situation. So that would be my evidence. There's a lot of that, more evidence I can point out later, but that's, things to look out for if you want to identify shows that don't use proper tone mapping. There you go.
Where is she? I really wanted to use my lucky microphone. There she is. What took you so?
Oh, Izzy's animation here is rough. That's so weird. Izzy's animation here is like pretty rough, but Hitch, even though he's like further to the side and not part of the focus, he's like animated a bit better in terms of like his idle motion. That's so weird. Okay, so from the top, start from the top. Izzy's holding the static pose, right? The infamous tired face pose. Like she's holding it. Like her body's not really swaying all that much. Her head is just sort of keyed to like sort of move this way and then keyed here and then keyed here or whatever. Like it's just key to key to key idle motion without any sort of overlapping action just for the idle. Whatever. Like those are like small detail things that I kind of expect them to take shortcuts on, but just to note that that is something they are still doing, still not doing, I suppose. But what starts to distract me is right when Zip arrives. For Izzy specifically here. Izzy's reaction to Zip arriving is insanely fast. There's no sound cue, so she wouldn't have heard her because we didn't hear her unless for some reason she could hear but we couldn't. By the time the camera starts to zoom out, Izzy is already reacting to Zip, which is just incredibly unrealistically fast. Another thing in animation that you want to keep in mind is how quickly characters can react to things around them. If a character reacts to something instantly, then it doesn't feel like they're actually reacting. It feels like they're just acting. They aren't actually part of the world. They are just like either acting, they're faking the reaction, or they're just puppets, maybe. There's like several possible things you can interpret it as just a normal audience member watching the animation. Whatever the case, it's not going to feel like it's a realistic character. And another thing that bothers me is Izzy's idle motion is incredibly static, and her little jump there, oh my god, does it lack weight. So when Izzy says there she is, she kneels down to anticipate the little hop, which is fine. So far, it's not too bad. The only thing about the anticipation that might change is maybe lowering her neck more too, but like that's minor. But the actual jump itself is a little rough. So obviously it's just key to key. I can probably identify the exact frames where the keyframes are for her like actual body, like the roots controller for her body. So we have one key here, key here, key here, key here, and then key right there. Another thing that I like to do in 3D animation is trying to make sure you can't spot all the individual keyframes of the animation, because if you can spot individual keyframes of a 3D animation that's supposed to look like realistic motion, then especially if you can like identify keyframes for like the entire body, that mainly just means that the animation is just incomplete, really. It's just the main thing that makes it obvious where the keyframes are is just where parts of the body are moving all in sync, I guess. Like all of the motion is moving in the same exact way from key to key, and then all the motion changes at the exact same time. So for example, right before Izzy starts to move down here, we know her body is slightly lowering and rotating down. So those are two motions that are happening at once, and it starts at the same time and it ends at the same time. And then we have this different motion that happens and starts at the same time, where Izzy's body starts to move back up, and it rotates up at the same exact time. And then we have another key here, and I know that because her body starts to rotate down again, and starts moving down a lot more. We can see that with her hips especially, where her hips just lower immediately here. But yeah, it's all happening at the same exact keyframe, starting at the same exact keyframe, ends at the same exact keyframe. And this is just motion that isn't given, like, I'm trying to find a way to, like, describe this. This is motion that isn't asynchronous. There's a lot of things that are happening in sync, and that's not realistic. When you move your body in real life, nothing in your body is perfectly in sync in terms of how it moves. Nothing is. Nothing. Even robots in real life have asynchronous motion because of mass and inertia, weight shifting. Robots still have weight. Unless they're super, super grounded and anchored, they're gonna, like, still wobble around a little bit, right? So, like, I can refer to this animation as sort of robotic, which isn't entirely inaccurate, but, like, even robots in real life would still have some of these principles, because nothing in real life is perfect. If a robot in real life feels like it's moving extremely perfectly, it's probably because it's extremely sturdily manufactured, well-tuned, and anchored. And no organic creature is any of those things. So, after the hop, we can see this happen again, where if we find the key before her head starts moving, so it's this frame here. Next frame, she starts to move her head. And when her head stops moving, it feels like nothing much happens afterwards. I think her chest is moving slightly afterwards a little bit, but that's not really enough. That's like only just a slight thing in this case. There's no overshoot, there's no ease in, ease out, really, other than what's, like, by default within, like, the curves in Maya or whatever. Now, I want to comment on Pip's, like, facial acting here when she's talking. This is, unfortunately, when it comes to facial expressions and acting within the face itself, it's hard for me to convey a lot of what I have, like, come to know into words. But I'll try my best.
What took you so long? Don't.
So one of the bigger issues here, I'll get to lip syncing later, but I'm mainly going to focus on facial acting, is
What took you so long?
when she says "took you so long," it feels like her, like, eye roll happens a little too late.
There she is.
What took you so long? And it's, like, late. And if I were to do this eye roll animation myself, I would probably have the eye roll, like, have it the pose stick here, and then when Pip turns back, like,
Don't tell me she is. What took you so long? Don't.
and when Pip starts saying, "Don't tell me you were doing whatever," right? When she's talking to Zip about sneaking around when she shouldn't have to, kind of thing. Then I would have, like, another pose where she might tilt her head and then makes eye contact with Zip. But for some reason, her acting right after the eye roll, she sort of just glides into the pose to have eye contact with Zip instead of having her eye roll hold and then eye dart and then maybe a head tilt to Zip. I don't know. It's just small things like that where I would probably change, like, the acting of it. Not necessarily the animation fidelity. It's mostly just acting in my mind right now.
Don't tell me you were sneaking around the palace again.
When she says "palace" again, like, right at the end of her, like, dialogue here, when she has her, like, nod down, I feel like I'd also have more body language put into that as well, because it just feels like her head is moving independently. She has her neck is slightly moving and her body is moving a little bit, but, like, her overall, like, posture isn't changing that much. I would have more posture change for some of that dialogue, because I think her posture stays the same pretty much throughout the entire shot. Like, look, her posture is pretty much the same. It moves a little bit, and her head obviously is moving more, but, like, her body is, like, the same exact posture.
You know you can just enter through the main doors. It's our house.
And that animation isn't bad. Like, this is a good animation for Pip here. Zip is pretty good here too. I think this probably might have been the same animator for the shot, maybe. But
It's our house.
the acting is good. Like, this is solid. Only thing it really needs is just, like, more time to, like, polish out the in-betweens between all the keyframes and stuff. But, like, the acting here for Pip is good.
It's our house.
Like, that's good. Like, there's nothing I would change other than just making it more polished. So that shot had more time than the others, obviously.
But if Mom knew I was there, I'd get stuck doing one of her random princess lessons.
Good point.
Now, Zip's body acting isn't horrible here until she smiles here when she hands over the microphone.
Good point.
And all of a sudden, how can I describe this? Like, right here is the start of when she starts to smile, and it's just a key pose to key pose. There's like no rhyme or reason as to why the smile would move like this. Man, how did I describe? This is such a weird thing to talk about because this is things I just intuitively understand, but I never really talk about facial acting that much. But like, the main thing isn't really the acting; it's more so just the transition from the pose here, which she's done talking, and then the smile. There's like, it's just the end of the dialogue and then the smile when there should be more in between. It just feels like key to key instead of more polished, like in between polish of the animation. So a lot of Sunny's acting, like body language and facial acting and all that, is good here for like throughout this entire sequence. If not, maybe a little bit overdone in some parts, but like where she overshoots her actions a little too much. But like those are minor things. The main problem is just lack of polish between the keyframes and just yeah, that's just a consistent problem with a lot of these shots.
A lot has changed around here in the past.
And also lip syncing. I should probably cover lip syncing more. Let's see.
Pony can live anywhere. And
Anywhere is like completely off sync here.
live anywhere.
So anywhere is definitely off.
Anywhere.
Yeah, it's just lip syncing is a little off sync. And I don't know if you guys can maybe hear that, but like the w shape is happening late in the mouth compared to what the dialogue is like in the audio.
Anywhere.
It just makes the mouth feel like it's just disconnected.
And we have magic again. We have magic again.
Yeah, I don't like the acting here actually. So like maybe what I would do here instead is like you see how Sunny is closing her eyes here and like scrunching her face quite a bit. I would have that happen before she like bounces up, because like a lot of this happens at the same time when she moves up, her face scrunches up and then releases pretty fast for some reason. I would hold it. I would have it start holding sooner and then longer as well. Not horrible, but like the screech is a little off. Like I don't know why she would open her mouth that much for a screech. Like it's an E. When you think of an E, right? When someone basically just E or just E, whatever, the mouth is mostly shut for that. When you try to do an E with your mouth open, yeah, it doesn't work. It becomes an ah instead of an E. So this doesn't match the dialogue. An E wouldn't be. That's not an E shape. It doesn't work.
To do well, the unicorns and Pegasi do. Ta-da! Now you, Sunny, show every pony what you can do.
Yeah, that Izzy wasn't too bad, actually. Again, this one, there are moments where the animation isn't bad, just needs more polish, and Izzy's animation here is one of them. Lip syncing's alright. Acting's good. Yeah, that's good. Like, just polish it up and I chip it with the movie, you know? Now, there's a lot of moments within this special where the eyelashes are clipping, like, in the eyelids itself. We can see that with Sunny, with her bottom eyelashes clipping into her cheeks. I don't think this is a rigging problem, because the movie didn't have that problem. Unless the rigging was completely redone to something else, which I kind of doubt. I'm pretty sure there's some retooling here and there, but I don't think they would just redo it all from scratch. It's speculation, of course, but I don't feel like that would be a good choice to do. There's no way. I would imagine that it's just the animators didn't move like the cheek controllers down, because perhaps the eyelid, like the bottom eyelid, is completely open, but the cheek controller is pushed up like through the bottom eyelid, causing the eyelashes to clip. Maybe. So that's just something they weren't super mindful of at the time. Maybe that's something maybe they can just learn through time. Maybe that's something they can improve on through later episodes and specials and such. But we'll see. We'll see. So when she says anyway here.
Anyway, the point is magic.
So anyway, the point is. So through the voice of that delivery, it feels like it implies to me that Sunny would be sort of like nervously contemplating what she's about to say, but a lot of her facial expression throughout that entire like piece of dialogue there.
Anyway, the point is
It's her just looking straight forward and smiling instead of like having her eyes look like at a diagonal upwards direction or something. Have her head tilted or something to imply that she's pondering on what to say next before she sort of resumes at trying to like stay confident in this like live stream like presentation. It's just missing some acting there, it looks like. So when the birds arrive here, there's something up with how their fur is rendered. I'm not sure what's going on. I think partially it might be because of the ray tracing, you know, light bounce thing getting clamps and such, but like especially here you can see how dark that is when you look like deep into the feathers, but like it wasn't like that before either. You can clearly see like an area of their face that's like clearly different now. Like this circle, this oval or whatever. That's so weird. And like you can see like the skin color, like the pink cheeks around the entire eye, not just the eyelids, but like the entire like eye socket region, I guess. That's so weird. I'm not sure what's going on here. I guess I can comment on some more lip syncing here. So here, when she says on, especially, like you can see how her lip corners like move in for the on, but then it shoots immediately back out. Still on. I feel like if you want the lip corners to reset back, it would be more gradual because she's not saying another word afterwards. And if anything, I would just keep the lip corners closed up a little bit because it's the end of the sentence. So I would like hold the pose more, a bit more relaxed than the actual like pose for the dialogue, but like at least hold the relative like position of the lips. But whatever.
See you at the festival. You okay, Izzy? Oh yeah. I mean, a little bit of ground glitter never hurt any pony. Well, thank hope.
Yeah, this one's a little rough. This is a little rough. So one of the things is that there's no motion blur here, especially when there's like such a quick motion. You can see how fast her head moves up. It's really fast. Really, really fast. But no motion blur, so it feels stop motion like. That's part of the weirdness.
Oh yeah. I mean, a little bit of ground glitter never hurt any pony.
And then her lip syncing is really, really bad. One of the things that you really don't want to do too much in lip syncing is just move the jaw so rapidly. So here's how I like to think about lip syncing in terms of like how fast something should move within the mouth. And tongue is, in my opinion, and when I do animation, is one of the things I would allow to move the fastest and most rapidly, then the lips, and then the jaw. The jaw should not be moving super rapidly unless the dialogue really dictates that. And I don't think this does. So let's see if I can break this down here. I think this is for glitter. 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 So look at the jaw. Hold on, let me go back a little bit so that... See how fast that jaw opened and closed there? Ground glitter. Ground glitter. Ground glitter. Like, I don't want... Like, look at that. That's within a frame. So, glitter. This is the E, and this is the T. And that's not right. So... Glit. You don't need your teeth to touch to do the t. It doesn't need to be closed all the way. So you don't need to slam the mouth shut to do the t. The t can be done mostly with your tongue, though of course having your mouth or having your jaw mostly shut can help with it. But you don't need the teeth to touch. So instead of having the mouth closed, it would be slightly open here, maybe, and then the transition to the can be less jarring because instead of the jaw opening all the way and then closing all the way and then doing a slight open, it'd be more like jaw open, then mostly closed, and then mostly closed again for this pose as well. So that it's not like springing, it's like just easing into this pose. You know what I mean? Like most of the lip syncing problems here is the jaw moving too much. That's what it is. Definitely. And here too, for magic, you don't need to move the jaw that much for magic. So a trick that I do for animation, if I'm having trouble figuring out how the jaw should move for any part of lip syncing that I might be doing, I place my hand under my jaw and keep my head steady and feel with my hand, the back of my hand, how much my jaw is moving for any given piece of dialogue or words that I'm saying or whatever. And you can do this too at home, and you notice how often or not often your jaw is moving. Yeah, your jaw is going to be moving a decent amount, but it's not going to be like, it's uncomfortable to do that. I can't really move my jaw faster than that without like feeling like I'm going to break something or like sprain a muscle. It is unnatural to have the jaw move that fast. You don't do that in real life. But even in like 3D animations, the only time the jaw's moving that quickly is if the motion you're doing is intended to be super exaggerated. But this isn't.
Well, thank goodness for magic.
Like, the entire body is pretty much static, and the dialogue is pretty simple and tame. It doesn't call for super exaggerated motion from the jaw. So, jaw motion and lip syncing is definitely a problem for the show right now as well.
What do you mean? You
Oh, whoa, wind up. Oh, this is so weird. Okay, look at this shot. And then look at that shot. Does something look different to you? Look at the shadows of the characters. Like, not the shadows on the ground, but like the character's face in the shade. The darker parts of the characters. Look at that compared to the shot afterwards. It's almost like they're glowing a little bit. That's so weird. Oh my. Sunny's mouth is glowing from the inside. Her teeth are in complete shadow. They should be really dark, but they're not. I think what they're doing here, they're casting a universal emission light or something that casts light on everything evenly, regardless of where it is in space. Just so that the characters aren't as dark in shadow here or something. That is a band-aid fix. Don't do that, man. This isn't the only point. I remember a different part of the special where a character's inner mouth is just basically glowing because the teeth is so bright in there, even though it's in complete shadow. Like, they're definitely doing the same thing as this. There has to be.
Just don't like it, okay? And every time I'm at the market,
So there's another thing about this special that's jarring to me. They do this a lot for some reason. It's not really good practice, but like, the camera is way too like wide lens here. I don't know why they needed to get this close in this wide lens. It's not horrible here, but it gets pretty bad in other parts where it's not really justified. From a direction standpoint, you don't want to do like a super close-up wide lens shot unless it's like to serve some sort of emotional purpose. So this shot here is good looking. It is. Like, it's one of the shots I used on one of my Twitter posts. Was like, yeah, this show can look good on some still frames because they're still using ray tracing. They're still using the movie models that are pretty much almost full fidelity, other than some like ray tracing shortcuts, but that doesn't always become obvious in certain lighting scenarios. It's not perfect. Like, it still has problems where it feels like some parts are way too overexposed when they really shouldn't be because of the color space problem, but like, it's minor because it's just rim lighting, and rim lighting can work as an overexposed part of the lighting, I guess. Like, it can work, and this is fine. Another thing you might have noticed in those in that Blender comparison from earlier, where I compared like normal color space to filmic color space within Blender, is how the colors feel way too saturated. So if I show you this here, this is filmic, and this is standard. And if I were to go to that other shot where I like made the sun less bright in order to not overexpose the image, you can see that the coat in general for Coloratura is more saturated. You can notice her like greenish bluish color a lot more than you can the filmic version because of how light interacts with colors when it's really bright. Bright colors in the sun desaturate naturally because that's just how light works when it comes to light interactions with like lenses of cameras or your own eyes even. And then if you look at Sunny here, we can see that her coat is very saturated now in sunlight. In the movie, let me pull up an example real quick. Here we have a still frame from the movie, and we can see that in the shade, Sunny's coat is, saturated, as it should be. But once we get to the bright spot, you can see how it sort of slowly becomes more desaturated and more bright. That's because the movie was definitely, without a doubt in my mind, using something like ACES to properly treat the colors. But then, if we go to the special, we can see that in direct sunlight, Sunny's coat is not really desaturating at all. And that's partially also because of how they probably had to lower the brightness of the sun to not blow out the image. So, yeah, just a quick little brief revisit on that topic. I didn't point it out with Zip earlier because Zip's coat is just pure white, and it's not really obvious with colorless coats because of how, they don't have any color. There's no saturation or desaturation to happen there because it's colorless. Now, for some reason, this shot feels like it's like way brighter. It's overexposed and it's sort of bloomy as well. It's so weird. It feels like compositing methods keep changing from shot to shot sometimes. It's kind of weird. So, look at the legs for that animation. Look at the front hooves. Mainly like the joints for like the wrist area. See that? See how the joints feel like they're popping from like being fairly bent to all of a sudden I can't even do it. How straight all of a sudden it is? That happens because of inverse kinematics, where you have a controller telling where like the grounded hoof should be on the ground, and when the character starts to move away from that limb, it quickly starts to raise the not raise, but like straighten out the limb. So like if I were to have my limb, you know what? I'm gonna put my camera up in full screen here. So if I have my limb fully straightened out, and if I start moving my limb just slightly back, you can see how quickly my joints are bending with just a small amount of distance, right? That's kind of what's happening there. And that's an artifact of just rigging in general, if you don't account for it. In the rigging side is have something called like soft inverse kinematics. I don't think there's like a real tool for this. It's just mostly a way to sort of dampen the transition from fully straightened to bent when you do inverse kinematics. Let me see if I can show an example of this from my rigs. So for this rig, I have the elbow rigged with soft inverse kinematics, or soft AK. When I start to straighten out the hoof, or the limb, I should say, you can see that there's a bone that sort of shrinks and grows when I start to go from the bent to the straightened position. And this is specifically to dampen the effect of when it's bent to straight. So if I were to turn this off, and when I start moving back up, the bone stays the same size, so it can no longer dampen the transition from straight to bent. So it happens a lot quicker than it would otherwise. It's a rigging trick you can often get away with because it's a fairly subtle change with how the elbow bends, while making it more animation friendly, so that animators don't have to worry about the IK popping as much. Here's one of the infamous ones in my mind.
What do you call it again? Oh yeah, unicycling.
So there's multiple things wrong with that shot. One is how close the camera is with the wide lens, again, and there's no reason for it here. We don't need that. Push the camera back, away from the character, and zoom back in, please. We don't need to be doing extreme close-ups. But also, another bigger problem is the animation of her circling around here. This animation is incredibly weightless. It's almost like someone put her on like a rotating platform and just had the platform rotating with her standing on it or something. Like, it doesn't feel like she actually circled around in any capacity. It doesn't feel like she's moving on her own. She feels like she's just being rotated by a platform circling in one place. You know her legs are moving, but it doesn't feel like it. And the main reason is multiple factors. One, she doesn't lean her head towards where she's moving for the circling. If she leaned her head forward more, it would feel like she's putting in more effort to rotate quickly. That's my thinking there. Another problem is this kind of circling isn't justified. Why would she circle like this? I can imagine her like doing a little twirl in place to celebrate unicycling, because that's something she's really into. The twirl wouldn't be a circle, it'd be just a twirl in place. She wouldn't be doing a literal circle around a small portion of the room. She would just rotate in place, kind of thing, like a little dance. But this isn't a dance. It's like suddenly she had the urge to just randomly walk in a circle for no reason. Like it's a weird acting moment. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Unicycling. Yep, but shh, it has to be a surprise.
The facial acting is off here too. It's like her sh expression is like just late or something. Like her lip sync is fine, but like the expression for her like being like shifty and like trying to be sneaky with the surprise present is just off, as well as the body acting feels like it's not expressive enough. I'll elaborate here. That's not really specific. So like when she does the surprise, where she is like getting excited about that, maybe I'd have her move up a little bit more, but that's not really the main problem. The problem is she's just moving from this pose to her like, oops, I shouldn't be saying that loudly kind of pose, instead of there being more transition with like, it's hard to describe this. Like, how can I describe this? Like what I would do here for the transition from the surprise to the sorry pose is, instead of just being like a linear blend or whatever between those two keys, I would have her like overshoot down. She'll overshoot down and then into her pose with like a surprise expression, like, and then maybe have her hoof cover her mouth, like saying, oops, sorry. This might be a bit hard to do because I know Anasani's delivery here is a little fast for that, maybe. But like, that's just an idea in my head to sort of improve that transition. I don't know. I just know that this needs to not be what it is. It needs to be something different in terms of how the pose transitions. Another moment where motion blur would be really nice for the wings flapping that fast, but it's not. It's without motion blur, it just doesn't feel real. It just feels fake. Here you can sort of see how weird the colors feel. It's true that these ponies have different colors for like the inner nostrils and the lips slightly, but it's definitely not supposed to look like this. This is not the correct lip color for Sunny. And if we take a look at the movie, we can see that the lips and nostrils are supposed to be darker. But it turns out the fur is a little bit darker instead, because I imagine it's because of the shortcuts they're doing in the ray tracing, like I was talking about before. That's my speculation. That's what I think it's going on there. So, yeah. I'm just noticing all these small things here. And I could have pointed this out earlier, but for some reason it's pretty noticeable on this shot, where sometimes eyelid color is just way off, and sometimes they're not. Just like Sunny's, for example, sometimes her eyelids are just yellow for some reason. Look at this. And there's no way this is a conscious choice, especially because this is just inconsistent. Sometimes it's not this color, sometimes it's the normal orange, and sometimes it's yellow. And that's probably rendering artifact, but I can't really know for sure why, especially because it's inconsistent like this. Like, maybe it is the ray tracing thing, they're taking shortcuts with the light bounces or whatever, but maybe it's something else. I don't know what's going on there. It's weird. This is so many strange things that happens within the visuals in this short. Like you can see in this shot, it's orange again. It's back to its normal color, even though it's still not entirely accurate because the lips are completely the wrong shade, the wrong brightness. It's supposed to be darker. The coat is too dark. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna repeat myself too much if I keep addressing that. And then we have this shot here. Again, Colorspace, tone mapping problems. For some reason, she's just overexposed completely, even though it's not really that bright otherwise. And like, the chairs are way too red for how bright it is, which is an indicator of no color space management. Without color space management, colors tend to saturate all the way at 100% first before they start to desaturate when they get bright, which is a problem. Eventually, they will desaturate if it's overexposed enough, but like, if it's in that in-between area, it's gonna fully saturate the color to its like actual color in the albedo texture kind of deal. So yeah, this is rough, and it doesn't end there. Again, with that fully illuminated light thing I was talking about earlier, where you can notice like inside Queen Haven's mouth, her teeth are like fully illuminated despite being mostly occluded by just her head. Like, not a lot of light should be reaching inside of her mouth, and even Cloudpuff's mouth. You can see Cloudpuff's uvula, and Cloudpuff's mouth isn't even that open. And there's no light shining directly into Cloudpuff's mouth to see him. It's a boy, yeah. his uvula. So, like, there is something that's casting light on all the objects evenly, I think. Or there's a light that's just like not casting shadows or something. It's really distracting. It's a band-aid fix to rendering problems. I do not like it. I really wish they wouldn't do that, but, you know, whatever. It's so distracting. Like, you can see in Zip's mouth here, where they aren't using a fake light, you can see her teeth are occluded because there's no lights that's actually casting through her cheeks. So it's mostly dark in there. There's a little bit of light reaching, like, the surface of the teeth here because her lips are a little bit open, but they're not open all the way where a bunch of light can flood inside the mouth. So it's just this jarring difference. You can see that? Glow in the dark. It's glow in the dark teeth, pretty much. Look at that.
But you're a princess, darling. You're going to be queen one day.
I do suppose festival planning does count as a useful skill for your future on the throne.
Wow, that was rough. Look at that. Hold on, wait. Queen Haven's head was so static throughout the entire bit of dialogue there. Wow, okay. Yeah, I remember seeing that before, but I forgot how bad that was. Not only that, her lip syncing was very, like, floaty feeling.
I do suppose festival planning does count as a useful skill for your future on the throne.
Like, especially later, like the last half of her dialogue there, like, her mouth is, like, very, very floaty. It's just, like, floating from keyframe to keyframe gradually.
And it does count as a useful skill for your future on the throne.
Like, what is that? Oh, man. This is... I don't want to blame the animators, right? It's not... There's no way to know how this end product happened. It could just very well be the lack of time, and then an animator just had to quickly whip out that shot in order to get this done on time. That's probably one of the many reasons that could happen. I feel like that's probably the most likely one. They were running out of time. They needed to complete some of the, like, more miscellaneous shots, and that's what they did. They just, like, rushed past that Queen Haven shot to get it done on time. That's probably what happened, I guess. I don't know. It's a possibility. It's pretty rough, though. It did not look good at all. That was really bad.
But you just got here.
I know. I'm not.
There's something missing with Sunny's acting. Like, maybe she should, like, tilt her head after she's done talking there or something. Because it's like, you just got here, and then she just stays static afterwards. That doesn't feel natural to me. I feel like she should, like, move to, like, a different posture slightly, at least a little bit.
Here.
I know.
I don't know. Something weird there. Here's one of the weirdest things I've noticed throughout the special that I don't know fully how this could happen. I have a theory, but, like... So, look at Zip's wings. The shape of the wings are not how they should be when they're closed, right? And this has happened before that I didn't cover up yet, because I wanted to save it for this particular shot, because there's something I wanted to point out for this one, for this particular shot. The wings are differently shaped because we know in this shot that they're going to be opened within some time during the shot before it cuts, which it does.
I'm not sure if I fit in here either.
Of course you do.
Dude.
Even if all I do is
Boom,
fly
there.
around.
So, like, at first when I saw this, I was like, oh, maybe the rigging they have internally at Atomic Cartoons, they had to simplify the wing rigging because it was too complicated for their workflow or something. But, like, afterwards, like, look at this shot afterwards. Look at this shot. It folds back into its proper shape. So the rigging does support the wings actually folding into their actual closed wing shape without model swapping. Because there's not a model swap there. That was a smooth transition, I think. So, like, if it's not a rigging problem, what else could it be? And my only theory right now is maybe there are some animators on the team that know how to make the wing rigging work. And maybe there's some newcomer animators that haven't used this rig before, don't know how it works, so they had to, like, improvise or something. Because it's I'm pretty sure the wing rigging is, like, really complicated to make it work and transition from those poses and all that. But, like, I don't know. It's a mystery to me. I don't know what's going on here. When I first watched this and noticed that, I was freaking out. I didn't know what to make of it. So, like, I still don't know what to think of it. I can only point it out and, like, leave it at that. I don't know what to say. I'm commenting on this. I have to. This is really, really not the right way to do the wing flaps. Specifically how the body bounces up and down like that. Like, this is not what I want to do. Maybe they referenced, like, the G4 animation for, like, the wing flapping and, like, how they fly, but, like, that doesn't really translate to these models very well. I wouldn't do it like this. I would never do it like this, especially with this extreme amount of up and down motion. No. That doesn't look very good. If anything, maybe just reduce the intensity of how far up and down the bodies move, I guess. But what I would prefer to do is instead maybe have the wings flapping slower, or have the wings spread out open and have them glide occasionally, and then maybe wing flap, glide, or something like that. Because real birds do that in real life too. That's not unnatural. That's pretty natural, actually. Yeah, anyway. But in real life, you don't see birds flapping their wings and their bodies going up and down like this. That's not how it works. So, like, this is not the proper way to do it. Please don't. I don't want to see this again. I don't want to see the animation like this again. This is not the right way to do this. It looks so distracting. I feel like I'm being too harsh. I don't know. Like, I know time is of the essence with these projects, but if anything, the easiest solution that wouldn't really take any time is to change the approach to, instead of making the body moving up and down so extremely, is to just tone it down a lot. Like, make it way less significant. Without having to do any sort of detail work, maybe that's the best way to go about it, I guess. I don't know. But that was not a good result there. Oh, that looks rough. Look at Zip's right front hoof here, like in this shot. Look at how it like transitions from pose to pose. Right front hoof. So the hoof starts moving on this frame. So this is frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8. It's on frame 8. It takes 8 frames to be fully extended out to on the mouth and stops moving, basically. Not to say having a quick hoof motion like that isn't possible to make look good in that quick amount of time, but there's no anticipation for it. There's no ease out. It just snaps to that spot. Like, look at it again. Like, it just stops on the chin. It just comes to a halt. Alright. So, I think I'm going to leave it here, because I know this video is going to be pretty dang long as it is. And there's probably not much additional things that I'll be pointing out that I haven't already said before. Like, I'd be a broken record and only pointing out individual, like, quirks within the special that share in common things I've already pointed out, but for that specific part of the special, you know. So, I'll just leave it at that. So, yeah, there you go. Like I said, this video was definitely going to be fairly critical. I am naturally a fairly blunt person. I don't like to sugarcoat things, but I also don't want to place blame on things that don't deserve it. Because like I said, when we have such an ambitious project like this, where we have to make an entire 3D series within the span of a year, have 3 hours of content ready with a smaller crew using movie-level assets, it is a lose-lose-lose scenario. You can't make that work very well without taking so many shortcuts. I feel for the crew. I know they have to rush through a lot of these things, with, you know, because that's just how they have to get the job done at the end of the day. So I can't blame any of the people that directly worked on the series. That's not reasonable to do. And let's say somehow I end up getting hired for the show as well. Like, if I were to apply, even though I don't have any Maya experience, Atomic Cartoons requires Maya experience. Let's just say they accept me anyway. Even if I become a part of that team, because, like, people expect a decent quality amount of work from me, but, like, I'm an independent person, working on my own schedule, and full control of my own, like, vision and all that, right? That's, like, the benefits of being independent, but being independent also means you're only one person. It takes a while to get things done. If you look at my YouTube channel and see how much, like, content I've made that's, like, actual animation work, it doesn't total up to a lot of minutes. you know? It takes a long time to do this kind of work. So, like, even if I become a part of the team, it's not like this show is going to get that marginally much better, really. I at least don't think so. Like, even if I was completely used to Maya and all that, it's a group effort, and also it depends a lot on how much time you have to finish the product. And there's a lot of moving parts for this. And I emphasize this again because it's important. I know people in the general public like to claim the easy target, but doing that is often incorrect. You're wrong when you do that because they probably don't get the full context, the full picture. I don't even get the full context. I don't get the full picture. I don't want to blame on any single thing right now, but I'm pretty sure it's not the animator's fault because I know time is of the essence in this kind of deal. There's so many things stacked against them. So, yeah. Anyway. With that said, thank you guys for watching through this very critical video. I do hope that they improve the time. There should be some potential for them to improve over time, even if nothing else changes. But I do hope that they do at least get some more resources somewhere here and there to improve the quality, because I don't want to see the series just get gutted so severely. Like, I know it's not going to look anything like the movie. That's not a possibility. But it's degraded way too far for my liking, personally. And I know there are a lot of other people that feel the same way. There are some that don't, and that's fine. But it is undeniable that there are a lot of people that have noticed a lot of visual quirks as well. They just don't know why they look the way they do. And I think I've provided some insight on that, hopefully. So an outro note. I have a Discord server you can join. It's a Discord server I had for a while that used to be just for patrons, but now I have it open to the public. I feel confident in having a public Discord server now, so I've decided to do it. You guys can join that below. And if you guys feel like you wanted to support me, I have Patreon links, and as well, there's a YouTube join link as well for my channel if you want to support me that way. Any kind of support helps a lot. I don't like to chill too much, but like, it does help. It really, really does help and keeps me from having to spend time doing other jobs. And then I can instead focus on doing more like YouTube stuff, my own personal project stuff. So the more support I get, the better off I'll be on my own. So, and on that note, I will see you guys later, and hopefully next time I'll be talking about the visuals of the G5 movie as a whole. I've talked about the trailer a little bit, but now I want to talk about the movie. But I want to talk about the series first, because the series was way more on my mind. So, see you guys later.